The gray water in the yellow plastic bucket sloshed rhythmically as Amara dipped the heavy string mop, wrung it out, and slapped it against the cold linoleum floor. It was 11:42 p.m., and the international terminal was caught in that strange, ghostly hour between the frenzied energy of the evening flights and the hollow silence of the graveyard shift. Amara paused for a moment, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, careful not to touch her face with her rubber gloves. At 29 years old, Amara had imagined a very different life for herself. She never thought she would be here, dragging a wet mop back and forth while wearing a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big. The constant, nagging mathematics of survival played on a loop in her mind. The rent for her studio apartment was due in 4 days. The electricity bill was already overdue, glowing red in her mind. And she had just received a final notice from the bank about her student loans. She pushed the mop forward again, trying to lose herself in the repetitive motion of the soapy water sudsing on the white tiles. It was always easier to focus on the grime on the floor than the loneliness that had defined her life for the last few years. Suddenly, the automated doors at the far end of the arrivals hall slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss. A gust of cold night air cut through the stale, recycled atmosphere of the airport. Usually, at this late hour, the only people coming through those doors were weary travelers dragging heavy suitcases, their eyes glazed over with jet lag. But the sudden shift in the room's energy made Amara look up from her work, clutching the mop handle for support. The air in the terminal seemed to tighten, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. A group of men in sharp, tailored suits moved in a strict V formation, cutting through the sparse crowd with the precision of a pack of wolves. They weren't ordinary airport security. They moved with a synchronized, silent lethality that made regular people instinctively step back and lower their eyes. In the center of this formation walked a man who seemed to command the very light around him. He wore a perfectly fitted black Mafia suit and a crisp white collared shirt that looked like it cost more than Amara would earn in 10 years. His posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on something in the distance that no one else could see. Amara's breath hitched in her throat, a sharp pain striking her chest. She knew that walk. She knew the way his jaw set when he was deep in thought, the slight, arrogant tilt of his head. It had been 10 years, but her heart recognized him long before her brain could process the absolute impossibility of him being here.
Mignon.
The name brought a taste of ash and honey to her mouth. He looked different now, harder, colder, like a statue carved from something unyielding and expensive. But it was him, the sweet, quiet exchange student who had read poetry to her under the campus oak trees was gone. In his place was a man who commanded the space around him with terrifying authority. This was not a student. This was clearly a powerful Korean mafia boss. Panic seized Amara. She couldn't let him see her like this, smelling of industrial bleach, her hair tucked under a fraying cap, her life reduced to cleaning up the debris of other people's journeys. She tried to turn the heavy mop bucket, to angle herself toward the service corridor and disappear into the shadows. But in her haste, the wheels of the bucket caught on the wet floor. The mop handle slipped from her sweaty grip and clattered loudly against the metal rim of the wringer before striking the floor. The noise was a sharp, echoing clang that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hall. The V formation of men stopped instantly. Their hands twitched toward the inside of their jackets. Amara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Slowly, the man in the center turned his head. Across 30 feet of sterile airport lighting, their eyes locked. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the background noise fading into a dull roar as the past collided violently with the present. The silence that stretched between them felt heavy enough to crush bone. For a fleeting moment, Amara hoped he might not recognize her. She prayed for it. She was older now, worn down by grief and the relentless grind of poverty. But Minjun's eyes, dark and unreadable, widened by a fraction of a millimeter. It was the only crack in his armor. He took a step forward, breaking the formation. His security detail immediately adjusted, one of the burly men stepping in front of him with a hand raised to block his path, murmuring something urgent in Korean. Min-jun didn't even look at the guard. He simply raised one finger, a small, dismissive gesture that froze the bodyguard in place. He continued walking toward her, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor she had just cleaned. Amara picked up the mop, her grip on the handle so tight her knuckles turned the color of old parchment. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee back to the safety of her anonymity, but her feet felt like lead. Amara, he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, stripped of the youthful lightness it once held, but the rhythm was the same. It was a voice that used to whisper promises in the dark, promises that had evaporated the day he vanished without a trace. Hearing her name on his lips felt like a physical blow. She straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet his gaze with whatever scraps of dignity she had left. Min-jun, she replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in her knees. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough for her to smell the scent of rain and expensive sandalwood clinging to his black Mafia suit. He looked at the dirty water in the bucket, then at her oversized uniform, and finally at her face. There was no mockery in his expression, only a profound, unsettling intensity. It has been a long time, he said, his English precise and clipped. 10 years for months and 12 days, Amara thought to herself, but out loud, she just nodded. Life happens, she said, lifting her chin slightly. Before he could respond, a commotion broke out near the baggage claim area. An elderly woman, struggling with 3 large suitcases, had tripped over her own feet. Her bags went sprawling across the floor, and one suitcase burst open, spilling clothes everywhere. The few passengers nearby just stared or walked around her, too tired or too self-absorbed to help. Without thinking, Amara leaned the mop against her cart. She rushed over, crouching down beside the woman. "It's okay, ma'am, don't worry, I've got it," Amara said softly, her hands moving quickly to gather the scattered items. She carefully folded a knitted sweater and placed it back in the case, offering the woman a reassuring smile that transformed her tired face into something radiant. Min-jun watched from where he stood. The cold mask of the Korean Mafia boss slipped further. He watched the gentleness in her hands, the way she soothed the stranger without a second thought for her own humiliation or the powerful man waiting behind her. It was that kindness, the same kindness that had saved him when he was a lonely foreigner in a strange land, that pierced him now. He signaled to his men. 2 of the burly guards immediately rushed forward, not to threaten, but to help Amara zip the bag and lift the heavy luggage for the old woman. Amara stood up, dusting off her knees, surprised to see the terrifying bodyguards acting like bellhops. She looked back at Min-jun. He wasn't looking at the luggage. He was looking at her as if she were the only living thing in the terminal. "You haven't changed," he said softly, stepping closer until he was invading her personal space. The intimacy of it made her skin prickle. "You have," she countered, her eyes flicking to the men behind him and his black Mafia suit. "Who are you now, Min-jun? You look like you own the airport." A shadow passed over his face, quick and dark. "I own many things," he said cryptically, "but I lost the only thing that mattered." The air between them crackled with unresolved history. Just then, the phone in her pocket buzzed violently. Amara pulled it out. It was a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. The message was short and terrifying. "Rico is back. He kicked your door in. He says he's waiting for you inside. Don't come home alone." The blood drained from Amara's face. The romance, the shock, the nostalgia, it all vanished instantly, replaced by the primal terror of a woman who knew she was cornered. Rico was the loan shark she had foolishly borrowed from when her mother fell ill last year. He wasn't a man who accepted excuses. "I have to go," Amara stammered, shoving the phone back into her pocket. She turned toward the supervisor's office. panic rising in her throat. I have to leave.
Now.
She didn't wait for permission. She grabbed her bag from the cart and started walking fast toward the exit, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't go home, but she couldn't stay here. She had to find a place to hide. Guilt and fear twisted in her gut. She pushed through the glass doors into the night, expecting to run to the bus stop, but the sky had opened up. A torrential downpour was hammering the pavement, turning the world into a blur of gray water and neon reflections. She checked the time. The last express bus had left 5 minutes ago. The next one wasn't for an hour. No, 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 she whispered, stepping out into the rain, feeling the cold water soak instantly through her thin uniform. A black SUV, sleek and massive like a tank dressed in tuxedo paint, pulled up to the curb alongside her, cutting off the wind. The rear window slid down silently. Minjun sat inside, the warm amber light of the interior illuminating his face. Get in, he commanded. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact from a man used to being obeyed. Amara shook her head, water streaming down her face, plastering her shirt to her skin. I can't. I'll find a way. There is no way, Amara, he said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. You are in distress. I can see it in your eyes. Get in the car. She hesitated, her pride warring with her fear of Rico waiting in her apartment. Please, she said, her voice cracking. I'm in trouble, Minjun. Bad trouble. You don't want to be involved. Minjun looked at her, his expression unreadable but intense. I am already involved, he said. The door clicked open. Get in. I will not ask a third time. Amara climbed into the back seat, dripping wet, shivering as the climate-controlled air enveloped her. The interior smelled of leather and safety. She sat as close to the door as possible, clutching her cheap canvas bag to her chest. Minjun said something in Korean to the driver, and the car surged forward, merging seamlessly into the traffic. The silence in the car was thick with unspoken questions. Minjun didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. Amara stole a glance at him. He was terrifyingly beautiful, but there was a dangerous edge to him now, a sharpness that warned against touching. Where do you live?
Minjun asked.
I can't go home, Amara whispered, staring at her hands. There are men there. Men who want money I don't have. Minjun turned his head slowly to look at her. The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. Men, he repeated. What kind of men? Loan sharks, she admitted, shame burning her cheeks. I needed money for my mother's surgery last year. I couldn't pay it all back in time.
Minjun nodded once, slowly.
He didn't lecture her. He didn't offer pity. He simply tapped the partition and gave the driver Amara's address, which he somehow already knew, or perhaps he just commanded the driver to find it. The drive to her neighborhood took 20 minutes. As the luxury SUV turned off the highway and navigated the potholed streets of her district, the atmosphere in the car shifted. The sleek vehicle looked alien against the backdrop of peeling paint, barred windows, and overflowing dumpsters. Amara felt a flush of shame heat her neck.
She didn't want him to see this.
She didn't want the boy who had known her when she was a bright-eyed scholarship student to see the cages life had built around her. The car pulled up to her apartment complex, a towering block of gray concrete that looked like a bruised tooth against the sky. Wait here, she said, her hand on the door handle. I just need to grab my things. If I'm fast, maybe they won't see me.
Minjun gab her wrists.
His grip was firm. You are not going up there alone. I have to, she said. No, he replied. He opened his door and stepped out into the rain, his expensive shoes splashing in a puddle. He buttoned his suit jacket with a casual grace. We go together. Amara followed him, her heart racing. They walked up the cracked stairs to the 3rd floor. The door to her apartment was already ajar, the lock broken. Inside, 3 men were sitting on her small sofa, drinking her cheap beer. They wore leather jackets and expressions of bored cruelty. It was Rico's crew. Well, well, Rico said, standing up and tossing an empty can onto her clean floor. Look at this. The princess finally comes home. He looked past her to Minjun. And she brought a date. Fancy. I don't have the money yet, Amara said, stepping in front of Minjun. I told you, Friday. Rico laughed, a dry, ugly sound. Friday is gone, sweetheart. We're done waiting. He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, the metal glinting in the dim light. We take what we can get. Maybe we start with you. Amara gasped, backing up, but she bumped into a solid chest.
Mignon setzte round her.
He moved with a fluid, terrifying calmness. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his black Mafia suit, looking completely out of place in the shabby apartment and yet entirely in command. You are leaving, Minjun stated, his voice low and bored. And you are forgetting this debt.
Rico is native.
Who the hell are you? Some corporate boyfriend. He lunged forward with a knife. Faster than Amara's eyes could follow, Minjun moved. There was a sickening crack of bone, a blur of motion, and Rico was on his knees, screaming, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The knife clattered to the floor. The other two men jumped up, but before they could attack, Minjun's security details swarmed into the small apartment like a tide of black ink. In seconds, the room was silent again, the three thugs restrained and pinned to the floor. Amara stood pressed against the wall, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. This wasn't just self-defense. This was military precision. This was violence honed into an art form. This was the work of a mafia boss. Minjun adjusted his white cuffs, his breathing not even elevated. He turned to her, his face softening instantly. Grab what you need, he said gently. You are not staying here.
But
the debt, Amara whispered. Minjun glanced at the men on the floor. Consider it paid, he said coldly. He looked back at her. Pack a bag, Amara. Please. 10 minutes later, they were back in the SUV. The car glided toward the city center, rising above the smog and the struggle. They entered the private garage of a glass spire that pierced the clouds. The elevator ride was silent, the numbers climbing higher and higher until they reached the penthouse. When the doors opened, Amara gasped. The apartment was a palace of glass and steel, overlooking the entire city. It was beautiful, cold, and lonely. There is a guest room down the hall, Minjun said. It has everything you need. You are safe here. Amara walked into the living room, feeling like an intruder. Minjun walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city lights, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom, but also like a prisoner in a tower. Amara walked over to a marble-side table where his phone sat. It buzzed, the screen lighting up. She didn't mean to look, but the message was right there. She had taken a few semesters of Korean in college, trying to surprise him back then. She recognized enough characters. The Northern Territory is secure. The bodies have been disposed of. The blood froze in her veins. She looked at the man standing by the window. The expensive black mafia suit, the disciplined violence in the apartment, the army of guards. It wasn't just business. It wasn't just wealth. He was a monster. A beautiful, protective monster. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minjun turned around then, catching the look of horror on her face. He glanced at the phone, then back to her. He didn't try to explain. He didn't try to lie. He just looked at her with those dark, sorrowful eyes. You are safe here, Amara, he said quietly. That is all that matters. But as Amara looked at him, she realized she didn't know if she was safe from the world, or if she was now in the center of the danger itself. The morning light that filtered into the guest suite was aggressive, bouncing off the polished chrome and white marble surfaces with a blinding intensity. For a disorienting second, Amara reached for the alarm clock on her chipped bedside table, only for her hand to brush against sheets that felt like woven water. The memory of the previous night came rushing back. The airport, the rain, the fight in her apartment, and the text message. Disposed bodies. She sat up abruptly, her heart giving a painful lurch. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. She exhaled a long, shaky breath and swung her legs out of bed. She needed answers. She crept out of the room, her bare feet silent on the heated floors. She followed the smell of toasted sesame oil and brewing coffee to the kitchen. Minjun was there. He had discarded the suit jacket and the tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a faint, jagged scar running down his left wrist. He was flipping an omelet with a casual proficiency that didn't match the lethal precision he'd shown the night before. "The coffee is fresh," he said, not turning around. Amara stayed by the threshold, her arms wrapped around herself. "We can't just pretend nothing happened, Minjun," she said. "I saw the message. I know what you are." He froze, the spatula hovering over the pan. Slowly, he turned to face her. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked tired. "And what am I, Amara?" he asked quietly. "A monster? A criminal?" He set the spatula down and leaned against the counter. "I am a man who survives. Just like you." "Do you think I chose this?" he continued. "Do you think when we sat under the oak trees reading poetry, this was the future I was dreaming of?" "Then why?" she demanded, stepping into the room. "Why did you leave? Why did you ghost me for 10 years and come back like a kingpin?" "I didn't leave you," he said, the words coming out strained. "I was taken. My father died. The family business required a successor, and I was the only blood left. If I had stayed, if I had contacted you, you would have been a target." He walked toward her, stopping just outside of touching distance. The air between them hummed with the electricity of a decade's worth of unsaid words. "I broke my own heart to keep yours beating, Amara." She looked up at him, searching for the lie, but found only a raw, bleeding honesty. "I've been watching you," he admitted suddenly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "For 6 months. Since I found out where you were." Amara stiffened. "You were watching me? Stalking me?" "Protecting you," he corrected. "From a distance. I saw you struggle. I wanted to intervene 1,000 times, but I knew it would bring the wolves. My world is dangerous, Amara. Last night, at the airport, I couldn't stay away any longer, and my hesitation cost you your anonymity. Now Rico's bosses know you are my weakness." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "What?" she gasped. "You mean they came after me because of you?" "Rico was just a loan shark, but the men he answers to, they are my rivals. They will use anyone to get to me." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." Amara felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by a surge of complicated longing. He hadn't forgotten her. He had been a ghost in the margins of her life, watching, waiting. The moment was shattered by the sharp wail of a siren from the streets below, followed by the harsh buzz of the intercom.
"Minion stiffened, pulling back instantly."
He walked to the wall panel and pressed a button. A grainy video feed appeared. The lobby security desk. "Sir," a voice crackled, laced with panic. "We have a breach. They bypassed the gate. They are in the elevator." Minjun didn't panic. He became ice. He turned to Amara, his face completely devoid of the warmth it held seconds ago. "Go to the bathroom in the master suite. Lock the door. Do not open it until you hear my voice."
"Minion." Emma started, tail gripping Hellerot.
"Do exactly as I say," he roared, the command echoing off the glass walls. It was the Mafia boss speaking now. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a sleek, black handgun, checking the magazine with a terrifying familiarity. "Go." He didn't look back at her as he moved toward the elevator banks. Amara didn't argue. She ran for the bedroom. She locked the heavy mahogany door, then the bathroom door, huddling in the oversized marble tub. She covered her ears, whispering a stream of nonsensical prayers as the muffled sounds of chaos began to drift through the heavy soundproofing. Dull thuds, the shattering of glass, a rhythmic popping sound that she knew from movies was gunfire. Amara squeezed her eyes shut. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying for the man in the white shirt who was standing between her and the abyss. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It stretched for minutes, then an hour. Finally, there was a knock on the bedroom door. A specific rhythm.
Top, top, top.
Amara. Minjun's voice came through, strained and hoarse. It is over. She unlocked the doors with trembling hands. Minjun was standing in the middle of the bedroom. He had shed his jacket. His white shirt was ruined, stained with blood, some of it red and fresh, some of it drying dark. He was holding his left arm, which was wrapped in a makeshift tourniquet. The room behind him was a wreck, a vase shattered, a bullet hole in the plaster. But he was alive. Amara let out a cry and launched herself at him, forgetting the blood, forgetting the fear. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. "You idiot," she sobbed. "You stupid, dangerous idiot." Minjun winced but wrapped his good arm around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. "I told you," he rasped, his voice shaking. "No one touches you." He stumbled slightly, and Amara realized he was hurt worse than he was letting on. She pulled back, her hands hovering over the blood on his side. "You need a hospital," she said, her voice rising in panic. "No hospitals," he grunted, leaning heavily on her. "My doctor is on the way."
Just
"Help me to the chair." She guided him to the velvet armchair in the corner, her hands stained with his blood. It was a baptism of sorts. She was no longer an observer.
she was part of this now.
As he sank into the chair, his eyes fluttered shut. "I tried to let you go," he whispered, his defenses crumbling with the blood loss. 10 years. I tried, but the universe keeps throwing us together. Amara knelt between his legs, pressing a towel against his wound. She looked up at him, seeing the boy she loved and the man she feared, and realizing they were inextricable. "Then stop fighting the universe," she said fiercely. "You want to protect me? Then you don't get to do it from the shadows anymore. You don't get to watch from a distance." She pressed harder on the wound, making him hiss in pain. "If we are in this, Minjun, we are in this together. No more secrets. No more hiding." He opened his eyes, dark and glassy with pain, and looked at her with a reverence that took her breath away. "It will be dangerous," he warned. "I don't care," she lied, though the truth was close enough. "I've been scared of poverty, of hunger, of failure for 10 years. I'm done being scared. I'm terrified of losing you again. That's the only fear I have left." The doctor arrived, a discreet, elderly woman who treated the gunshot wound with the casual efficiency of someone who did this often. That night, the dynamic in the penthouse shifted permanently. Minjun was confined to the bed, feverish and weak. Amara took charge. She ordered the guards to secure the perimeter. She managed the meals. She sat by his bedside, wiping sweat from his brow. The power imbalance that had defined their reunion, billionaire mafia boss and cleaner, evaporated. In this room, with the smell of antiseptic and rain, they were just two people clinging to a second chance. It was 3 days later when Minjun was finally strong enough to walk to the balcony. The city was glittering below them, a sea of lights that didn't seem quite so cold anymore. Amara stood beside him, leaning against the railing. He reached out and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a marriage vow. "I am getting out," he said suddenly. Amara looked at him. "What?" "The business," he clarified, looking out at the horizon. "I cannot have both. I cannot have this life and have you. And I am done choosing the life." He turned to her, his expression serious. It will take time. It will be messy. I will have to dismantle things, pay people off, maybe disappear for a while. But I will do it. Amara squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out, she said. Minjun chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. And you? What do you think? Amara stepped closer, rising on her tiptoes to press a kiss to his jaw, then his lips. It was soft, tasting of promise and relief. I think you're a lot of work, she teased gently against his mouth. But I've never been afraid of hard work. He wrapped his arms around her, careful of his injury, and pulled her into the safety of his shadow. For the first time in 10 years, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of a future that, while uncertain, belonged entirely to them.